What's going on, Bird Gang? Happy Saturday, and welcome back to the Philly Special Podcast. This is going to be a great podcast. I can already feel it. I mean, when you have such a statement victory like the Eagles did on Monday Night Football just a few days ago, makes me smile, man. It makes me smile to see the Birds play that well. It was such a fun game, an exciting game. We'll get into that. Obviously, a big game coming up in the NFC East in the division race against the Commanders as well. We'll talk about that. Biggest story in that, obviously, Carson Wentz's first time playing the Eagles since his departure. Big news there. Sorry, I heard my cat against the door, I think, so got a little distracted. But anyway, man, Philadelphia, 2-0. Now, week one, obviously, they played the Lions. It's the Lions. Historically, one of the more worst teams in the NFL. I think they're going to be a little better this year, but still, it's the Lions. Nothing great. Minnesota is my pick to win the NFC North. I think they have a chip on their shoulder. They're going to prove something this season. They're a good team. And to win that game the way the Eagles won the game in dominant fashion, 24-7, that's impressive. And I think it has kind of made the Eagles a statement win, being one of 6 teams left that are 2-0, hanging with the big boys like the Chiefs and the Bills. The Eagles are starting to look like a real team, a real contender in the NFC. And, obviously given the circumstances in the NFC East, New York is another team that's 2-0, which is very interesting, kind of surprising. But with Dak Prescott being hurt, and Washington kind of performing like they're halfway decent, it's going to be an interesting race, but I think the Eagles are starting to solidify their spot of being the favorites to win the NFC East, and I believe they are now. Let's look at this game, though, because it was one for the books, I'll tell you that. Jalen Hurts, 26 of 31, 333 yards passing, averaging 10.7 yards per pass, 1 touchdown. He did have that interception, though, in the second half, which was a little bit scary, but luckily the defense had our back. We'll talk about them because that was an amazing performance as well. And to go along with that, 57 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. So 3 total touchdowns for Jalen Hurts, 333 yards in the air, 57 on the ground. This was a great game for Jalen Hurts. He carried over a great game from last week. Jalen Hurts is starting to show people that he is a for-real quarterback in the NFL, that this is a guy that is going to be a difference maker for the Philadelphia Eagles. It's early. We have 15 more weeks of football, 14 more weeks as far as the Eagles playing. And a lot can happen in 14 weeks, but I'll tell you, he is off to a tremendous start. I didn't think the Eagles would be 2-0 at this point. I thought they would have dropped either that first game or this game, and they've come away 2-0. And Jalen Hurts is a massive part of getting that offense moving. It just looks like they have a flow, like there isn't really a defense yet that has risen to the occasion to stop what they are putting together. Especially when you have Miles Sanders, who's putting 80 yards on the ground for the second week in a row. I think he had 90 last week, 80 this week. When you're getting that mix-up of run-pass, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing because you don't know what to expect when you're the defense. When Miles Sanders can dominantly run and have 80 yards rushing in a game, you're going to have to worry about the run game. And when you're worrying about the run game, these receivers that had a great game as well, we'll get into their stats in a second, are going to start to fly open. The play action's going to start working, and the Eagles are just utilizing everything so well on the offensive side of the ball. It's hard to nitpick any complaints, especially in the first half, for the Eagles in this game or through the first 2 games of the season. Let's look at the wide receivers because I told you guys last week, everybody was on the case of Devontae Smith. We're talking about how dominant A.J. Brown was in week 1, and it was a very dominant performance. And obviously no catches, no yards for Devontae Smith. And I said, guys, don't worry about it, okay? Don't worry about it. Devontae Smith is going to get his, and he did this week. He had 7 catches, he had 80 yards. You like to see a touchdown, maybe something get in there. Quez Watkins obviously had a huge touchdown. That was play of the year so far. It was so beautiful. I mean, it hurts with the arm strength to get it all the way down the field. It just landed in the breadbasket of Quez Watkins, and when you have that kind of speed, it's over. And that's something that's going to be dangerous all year long. He had 69 yards receiving. A.J. Brown, 69 yards receiving. Still a decent game. If you have him in fantasy, you're a little bit disappointed. But overall, as far as just production for Philadelphia, he did great. But this is what I'm talking about. Devontae Smith had 7 catches, A.J. Brown only 5, and Devontae Smith had 11 more yards than A.J. Brown. It's going to be a mixed bag, guys. It's going to be a mixed bag all season, and that's what you want. When you have the ability to spread the love around that much, that is exactly what you want in an offense, and that's what the Eagles have had so far. Now, they haven't played the best defenses in the world, Detroit and Minnesota, but they're also not the worst. They're lighting up teams that are decent. They're probably middle tier, maybe upper middle tier. It's not the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's not the Buffalo Bills, but these are decent defenses in the NFL. Washington has a decent defense as well. I'd say probably the best defense out of the 3 that they're going to see. So that's going to be a test going into this week to see if they can keep that offensive production up. But we're just talking about this game right now, which, by the way, was rated by some NFL insiders as a near-perfect game for the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's hard to say otherwise. I mean, they gave up 1 touchdown to Irv Smith. Maybe should have given up more. There were a few drops for the Vikings as well. Kirk Cousins is statistically the worst Monday Night Football quarterback of all time. Statistically speaking, record-wise, he is the worst Monday Night Football quarterback of all time. And he didn't have a very good game either. 221 yards and 3 interceptions. Really should have had like 5 interceptions. And obviously, Darius Slay was just a massive part of that movement. I mean, such a great game for Darius Slay. Held Justin Jefferson to 48 yards. I was saying earlier last week, if they can hold Justin Jefferson to 100 yards and only give him 1 score, like that's a good game, but they might still be able to win in a shootout. To hold him to 48, he's not even the leading receiver. 52 yards for Adam Thielen. Justin Jefferson only with 48. Every single time Darius Slay lined up against Justin Jefferson, he rose to the occasion. Every single time. He got intercepted on him twice and honestly should have had 2 more. There were 2 that literally went in and out of his chest and his arms. He should have had 2 more interceptions. So just an absolutely stellar game from Darius Slay. And I think he's playing this year with a chip on his shoulder, and that makes me happy because he wasn't rated as a top 5 cornerback in the NFL, and I think that pissed him off. And rightfully so. Pissed him off because I think he was so forgotten last year. He didn't really have the big pick numbers. He did get picked on a little bit as well, but this year he's been rock solid so far, and to lock up perhaps the best wide receiver in the NFL, definitely in the top 5 right now, to hold him to 48 yards and intercept his quarterback twice when passing to him, that's a stellar game, and it derailed the whole Vikings offense. And the other part that derailed the whole Vikings offense was the rush defense. I mean, the leading rusher, guys, in this game, if you haven't looked at the stats, it's insane. Kirk Cousins had 2 carries for 20 yards. That was it. That's their leading rusher. 2 carries for 20 yards. Jalen Reagor had a carry for 17. Dalvin Cook had 6 carries for 17. And Alexander Mattison had 2 for 8. 62 yards total. Miles Sanders outran the entire Minnesota offense by himself, and Jalen Hurts was only 5 yards away from tying them. That is dominance on the defensive side of the ball to stop the run. And the Eagles, through 2 games, have looked pretty good on the rush defense. Now, DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams did have a very good game against the Philadelphia Eagles, but I think a lot of that spurred from like the first quarter, beginning of the second. They started to lock it down pretty well in the second half. So I'm satisfied with the rush defense so far. One complaint I still have is they're not getting to the quarterback that much. Kirk Cousins luckily made some bad decisions. He lost. What am I trying to say here? He screwed himself a few times by making some bad decisions, throwing the interceptions, and the receivers dropping passes as well. So there was some help there, but the Eagles were able to push across 2 sacks. Josh Sweat and Fletcher Cox both had one. That is an improvement from last week, so that is good. I still wish we could see a little bit more pressure on the quarterback, because it's dangerous when you start playing this game where you give quarterbacks so much time, and I already touched on it last week, so I won't go crazy into it this week. You guys know, you're smart. When you allow a quarterback to have that kind of time, they're going to get into a rhythm, and they're going to just keep completing and completing and completing and completing. And we saw that last year when they had to play Joe Burrow, when they had to play Justin Herbert, when they had to play Derek Carr. These guys just got into rhythms and lit up the defense. You have to be able to disrupt it. I do think Gannon did a great job calling the blitzes. The pressure was really getting to Kirk Cousins when those blitzes came, and he panicked, and he just threw up bombs to Justin Jefferson, who was, of course, locked up by Darius Slay, and that's how we got so much success. So keep it up with the blitzes. I think they're worth it. The linebackers are quick, man. We have a new linebacking core, and they are doing amazing. TJ Edwards, 7 tackles solo for him, 10 total in this one. He had a great game. TJ Edwards had an absolutely phenomenal game. Maddox had a good game. Marcus Epps, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Kazir White, again, 5 tackles. I mean, it was a good game. Overall, it was a good game. I wish I would see a little bit more. He's not even in here. Nakobe Dean. You know, I feel like we haven't seen a lot of Nakobe Dean yet. I'd like to get him more involved in the defense. I have to look at the snap counts. I haven't seen it before this podcast, so I don't know if he's even getting in as much as he should or as much as I think he should, but he didn't record any stats, so, you know, hopefully we see more Nakobe Dean down the line. If you guys are curious about Jordan Davis, I also don't think he recorded any tackles. But of course, when we're talking about great run defense, Jordan Davis's name is going to be mentioned. So he obviously has been impactful, him and Fletcher Cox on that defensive line. So I'm not worried on that front at all. One more shout out too that I want to say, because this ended up being a huge play in the game. Jake Elliott's trying to kick a field goal and it gets blocked, and you see just an amazing chase down tackle by Aaron Sipos, the punter, the holder in this scenario. But Sipos runs down the field and stops the Vikings. At this point in the game, man, I mean, 24-7, they can score a touchdown and just make it that much closer to where it's like you're starting to freak out a little bit. And Sipos saving that from being a touchdown. Now, instead of 7 points, they could be potentially getting 3, or best case scenario, and what ended up happening is we get a turnover. And that's what happened. They get a turnover. So Sipos' effort is like such a good example, and hopefully they show this a lot in film for the Eagles, and I'm sure they will. Never give up on a play. Never give up on a play, because you making that shoelace tackle literally changed the trajectory of the game. I mean, who knows if Minnesota would have ran that into the end zone. Now they have momentum. You know what I mean? They have momentum. The defense has momentum. Everybody's got momentum. The feeling is the Vikings are starting to put things together, and they could come back in this game. It only needed a score for that to happen, and Sipos saved that from happening. So that was probably my play of the game, honestly, because that was an amazing play. And I'm kind of like a sucker for things like that. So the play of the game is probably the Quez Watkins touchdown. That was pretty awesome. There's just so much great things on offense. Somebody I didn't even mention who was the leading receiver for the Eagles in this game. Dallas Goedert had 82 yards receiving, and that consistency by tight end has been such a staple for the Eagles for so many years, and it's helped the offense so much. And it's not surprising when you got to cover Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown every single play, when you got to worry about Quez Watkins running a fade, he's going to pop open. And, you know, Goddard has had some problems with his hands, but he did a great job having 82 yards and 5 catches in this one. He had 6 targets, so he didn't catch every single one of them like Devontae Smith, who was 7 for 7, but still, great effort, good game, just all around. It's hard to pick out something that's like, dang, that sucked, you know, because really it was such a solid game. I think the only 2 things I would nitpick, and one is kind of important, but number 1 is getting to the quarterback, especially when we only have a 4-man rush. That defensive line has to be better at pass rushing, because when we do face, you know, better teams, and it's going to happen, you can't let them have that much time. It can't be a blitz every single time either, because they'll see it coming and they'll prepare for it. We have to be able to get to the quarterback. But more importantly, the Eagles, and I had a discussion about this on Twitter. I asked for your guys' thoughts, and it was shared. This thought specifically, the Eagles they have 14 points in 4 quarters of second half football. 14 points. They scored 14 points in the third quarter against the Lions. And other than that, they have no points, which means in the fourth quarter, they have 0 points. So there's 2 ways to look at it. One, that's pretty impressive that they're winning so dominantly in 2 weeks, and they're not even scoring in the fourth quarter. It just shows you how much dominance they have in the first half. But also, like, why can't we push the ball across the end zone or even kick a field goal in the second half of the game? Because we're not going to dominate every single game we play. You know, it's just not possible. So you obviously want to start putting together scores in the second half. So why isn't that happening? There's a couple of things. I mean, in this one, maybe they're winning 24-7. You want to protect a lead. I'm not really into that strategy just because, like, third quarter especially, there's so much time left. Run up the score. You know, the more points you have, the better off you are. Now, I think there's proof that that's not the case when you look at the Cleveland Browns in this week, where Nick Chubb runs in a touchdown, and the next thing you know, the Jets get the ball, they score, they get an onside kick, and then they score the game-winning touchdown, right? Had Nick Chubb just gone to the ground, the game would have been over. That's fourth quarter, though, and that's late fourth quarter. I agree there. Run the clock if you're up by that many points. Run the clock as much as you can, because the clock is your biggest enemy, especially when you're in possession of the football. But in this game, man, in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, it doesn't really make sense. And I don't think that's what the Eagles were doing. With that being said, I don't think they were playing conservative. I just think the Vikings stepped up in a bigger way. Obviously, they had the turnover as well. So it was a little disheartening that this game couldn't have ended up being, 38-7, because really it had that kind of potential. But the defense played so well that the offense was never really in danger. There were a couple of drives where I'm like, let's just end this, one more touchdown, get it to 31, and the game's over, right? And we never really got there, but it wasn't pressing. So I'm not freaking out about it completely. No points in the fourth quarter. It's just a little concerning. It's something to, like, kind of stick a pin in it and just keep an eye on it. And that could change as soon as next week. So I'm not too concerned. I'm not too worried, but it's just something to think about. No points in the fourth quarter, only 14 total in the second half for the Philadelphia Eagles. But a 2-0 start, man. A 2-0 start. And when you, like I said, you're in the same conversation as the Bills and the Chiefs right now. The whole sports world is talking about Jalen Hurts and how this guy is for real and he might be an early MVP candidate, and how good the Philadelphia Eagles are looking. And that's so promising because there were some question marks going into this year, right? I mean, we knew that we have draft capital going into next draft. We did a great job in last year's draft getting A.J. Brown. We've addressed the needs pretty well on the defensive side of the ball, just beefing up the linebacking position, adding Jordan Davis on that defensive line, getting C.J. Gardner, getting James Bradbury, and getting people that are actually worth a damn on the outsides to help Darius Slay. Huge additions. And there was high expectations, but at the same time, you still have this quarterback that we weren't exactly sure what we had yet. I would say last year was still question marks for me. I saw bursts where I was like, yeah, Jalen Hurts has a lot of talent. This is a guy that can, overachieve. But at the same time, there were a lot of mistakes. He doesn't go through all his reads. He's too quick to run the football. There's things he needed to work on, and it's so clear now through 2 weeks he's worked on them. And I think he has adjusted to what an NFL quarterback is supposed to look like, and more specifically what a mobile NFL quarterback, a successful mobile NFL quarterback is supposed to look like. And Jalen Hurts is the epitome of it. There are not a lot of quarterbacks that are doing better than Jalen Hurts in the NFL right now, and that's what you want. So it's 2 weeks of football, I know. I'm excited. Who isn't? We're 2-0. The offense is rolling. The defense looked incredible against one of the best offenses in football. It's a good time to be an Eagles fan right now. That can change on a dime. If we're Eagles fans, we know. That can change on a dime. But let's celebrate 2-0 and let's look ahead. So we're playing the Commanders in Washington. Obviously, when Carson Wentz comes back to Philadelphia, that's going to be a huge game as far as reaction. And I'm very curious what the reaction is going to be, because I have a special place in my heart for Carson Wentz. I have his rep helmet. I have a chrome rep helmet with his autograph on it right here to my left. I think I've showed it on the podcast before. Carson Wentz was such a massive part of the Eagles winning the Super Bowl, and there are still people that don't acknowledge that, which is just wrong. This is a guy that was going to win the MVP, more than likely was going to win the MVP award. if he'd stayed healthy, if he had finished out the season, very well could have led the Eagles to a Super Bowl himself. And of course, that's not the case. Nick Foles came in, did an excellent job, won us the Super Bowl. All the praise and glory in the world to Nick Foles, deserves that statue outside the link. But it's so forgotten how great Carson Wentz set up Nick Foles to have home field advantage, to be the number 1 seed, to get the bye week. Carson Wentz was a huge part of that. A massive part of that, and it wasn't a product of the system, okay? I mean, Carson Wentz was on track to be the MVP of the NFL, and he hasn't really been the same quarterback since then, but I'll tell you right now, he's off to a hot start. He's off to a very hot start. You know, comparatively, if we're looking, 576 yards, only 1 passing touchdown for Jalen Hurts. That obviously is not including, I believe now, his 3 rushing touchdowns, but still 4 total touchdowns. And Carson Wentz has 650 yards and 7 touchdowns. So, you know, Carson is playing really well right now. And he's got not as good of a receiving core, obviously, as the Eagles do at this point. Curtis Samuel, though, is off to a great start. He's got 133 and 2 touchdowns. But it's not a team, it's a team that can be overlooked, especially when you have this kind of momentum. If you're starting to let that get to your head and you're maybe thinking about these bigger games that are coming up, and now you're going to Washington against Carson Wentz, who of course probably has a chip on his shoulder for this game, you need to be at your best. This is another game for me that's sneaky. I think Washington is actually pretty decent this year, which is very surprising. There were a lot of people, though, I shouldn't say very surprising, because there were people that were picking Washington to win the division. And I didn't think they were going to be this good. Now they are only 1-1. Again, we're through 2 weeks, but you can see it, right? I mean, Gibson's playing great. Carson's playing great. They have one of the better defenses in the NFL. The offense, I think, can roll. I think they're going to be fine. This should be a 3-0 start for the Eagles, but it is one that I think can be overlooked, and it's one that can get out of control quickly if we can't figure out how to get past the defense, and especially if our defense is riding the high of last game and not looking at this game. And Carson Wentz is definitely a quarterback that if you let him stay in the pocket, if you give him all day, he will pick you apart. He is capable of doing that. We've seen it time and time again when he played for Philadelphia. So you need to get to Carson Wentz. The blitz is such a good strategy against Wentz, too, because he's prone to mistakes. He makes bad passes every now and then. He panics. You have to get him down, though, because he's really good at scrambling. He's able to get out of the pocket. And when he gets that extended time, he's usually pretty good at finding somebody open. So first person that gets to Wentz needs to take him down. That's the big thing on the defensive side of the ball. And on the offensive side of the ball, just to figure out the defense and just push like we do, like we have the first 2 games. Just keep the strategy the same. I don't see why it needs to change. And just keep rolling, keep scoring. The only thing I would say is this might be a game where we're going to need points in the second half. So let's get into the second half and score some points. 3-0 start for the Eagles. How does that sound? And who would have thought? I'm sure there are people that predicted it. I would have thought we would drop one of these 3 games, probably Minnesota. I could see us winning this game, and I could see us winning the first game. This is an NFC East rivalry, though. These games, you never know. Sometimes it splits, especially when you're the away team. That's a disadvantage. So this is another good prove-it game. I like it, and I kind of like that we're ramping up. You know, it seems like Detroit was a good starting challenge, a solid middle-tier team, to Minnesota, that is probably a fringe playoff team, if not even better, to Washington, who's overperforming and playing a quarterback that has a chip on their shoulder. It's like kind of small steps and scaling up that the Eagles are taking, and that's what you want, because you don't want to get too comfortable ever. If you're playing 4 bad teams in a row and all of a sudden you're playing a good team, there's so many things that can go wrong in those 4 bad team games, because you might be looking forward to the good team and you drop one of these games to the bad team. We've seen it happen before. It happens all the time. So this is a great stepping stone start for the Eagles, and I think they can get to 3-0. I haven't seen the power rankings yet, but I gotta imagine we're in the top 10, maybe the top 5. So it's great. I mean, it's great to be an Eagles fan right now. We're off to a hot start. I'm excited to see this Washington game, man. It's a 12 o'clock game here in Central Time, 1 o'clock game in Eastern Time. Yeah, and we'll have all the coverage for you. I think that's all I've got for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, I really appreciate all of the love that you guys give me on Twitter and all the other social media. It really means a lot to me, and it helps me kind of motivate me to keep going with this brand. So thank you for listening. If you're not following us or following me on Twitter anywhere or any other social media, it's at the Philly Special PC on Twitter, the Philly Special Podcast on Spotify and YouTube, and the Philly Special Podcast on Facebook. We're also on Instagram. I'm being honest, don't really use Instagram that much. Twitter is definitely the best place to follow the podcast right now. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for us this week. Philadelphia 2-0, great game against the Minnesota Vikings and a tough matchup against Washington coming up. I'm excited for the game. I actually might do like a live stream or something during this game. Let me know in the comments if that's something you guys are interested in, if you guys want to hop in and just talk about the game. Might have the ticker up top or something, just doing something a little bit different, having fun. Yeah, let me know if that's something you guys are interested in. But for now, have a great Saturday, enjoy your weekend, and fly Eagles fly on Sunday. And we'll get back to you on the Philly Special Podcast next week.